Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're diving into a really interesting piece of ML research. It's called LLM Agents Display Human Biases, but Exhibit Distinct Learning Patterns.
Yeah, this one caught my eye too. It's basically looking at how these big AI models, the LLMs, make decisions when they learn from, experience.
Right. So the researchers put them through these repeated choice tasks.
Exactly. Gave them feedback, watched how they learned, and then compared it to us, to how humans learn in similar situations.
And that's pretty important, isn't it? Understanding if these AIs think and learn like we do, or if it's something else entirely.
Absolutely crucial. Are they just complex pattern matchers, or is there something deeper, some echo of general learning principles? This paper tackles that head on using a specific learning setup.
Okay, so let's get into that setup. They talk about decisions from experience tasks, DFE.
DFE, yeah. Think of it like this. You have two buttons, you press one, you get a reward.
Yeah.
You don't know the odds beforehand. You just have to learn by trying them out again and again, seeing what happens. Trial and error, basically.
Pretty much. And the paper asks, do LLMs put in this same situation show the same kind of quirks and biases that we humans consistently show?
Because humans aren't perfectly rational in these tasks, right? We have known biases.
Not even close to rational, usually. That's what makes it interesting. We have these predictable ways we deviate from optimal choices. And this study focuses on 4 key human patterns.
Okay, let's break those down. First one.
Underweighting of rare events. We tend to ignore things that don't happen often, even if they're really significant when they do.
Like a small chance of a big win or a big loss. We don't weigh it properly based on the actual probability.
Exactly. Which is funny because if you just tell someone the probabilities up front, describe the situation, they react differently. That's the whole description experience gap.
Interesting. Okay, what's the second one? Surprise triggers change. So if something unexpected happens, a really good outcome when you expected bad, or vice versa, it makes us more likely to switch our choice next time.
Even if the choice we made was generally working out okay before the surprise.
Yeah, even then, it's like the surprise itself jolts us into rethinking or exploring. Maybe it's a signal that our understanding is wrong.
Huh. All right, number 3.
This one's a bit weird. The wavy recency effect of rare events.
Wavy.
Wavy. So after a rare event happens, our sensitivity to it doesn't just fade smoothly. First, it drops off for a few. Intuitively, sensitivity starts creeping back up.
It increases again.
Yeah, peaks around, say, 12 to 15 trials later, and then finally fades out properly. It's like the memory of it.
Oh, that is specific and kind of strange.
Oh.
Okay, and the last one.
The correlation effect.
Mm-hmm.
This is about how quickly we learn, depending on how the rewards for the two options relate to each other.
How so?
If one option is just consistently better positive correlation, we learn pretty fast which one to pick. Makes sense.
Right.
But if the options are negatively correlated, meaning when one pays out well, the other tends to pay out poorly, making the better option not always better on any given trial, trial learning gets much, much slower.
Gotcha. It muddies the water, makes it harder to see the long-term advantage.
Precisely. A real challenge for learning systems, human or AI.
So those are the 4 human phenomena they were looking for in the LLMs. How did they actually set up the experiments?
They designed 4 different DFE tasks. Each one was a binary choice, option 1 or option 2, and ran for 100 trials. Standard stuff for human studies.
And crucially, after each choice, the participant, whether human or LLM, got feedback.
Full feedback. They saw what reward they got for their choice and what they would have gotten if they'd picked the other one.
Ah, the counterfactual. That gives a lot of information.
It does. It speeds up learning compared to only seeing your own outcome.
And these 4 tasks were designed to target those specific phenomena, right?
Exactly. Tasks 1 and 2 had rare events built in so they could look for underweighting, the surprise effect, and that wavy recency thing.
Like, one option safe but boring, the other risky with the small chance of something big.
Something like that, yeah. Classic setups. Then tasks 3 and 4 were designed specifically to test the correlation effect, manipulating whether the better option was consistently better or not.
Makes sense. Which LLMs did they put through this?
They used OpenAI's GPT-4 Mini and Google's Gemini 1.5/002. So pretty current models.
And they played around with the temperature setting.
They did. Tested temperatures, 0.2, 1, and 2. Temperature controls randomness, basically. Lower means more predictable, higher means more exploratory.
Did it make much difference?
Turns out, not really. Temperature didn't seem to have a big impact on the main pattern, so they mostly focused on the default temperature of 1.
Okay, and what about how the LLMs remembered the task history? You mentioned 2 ways.
Right, 2 context paradigms. One was chat mode, like a normal chatbot conversation.
Yeah.
The model has access to the history, but it's not explicitly said back in every single prompt.
Kind of like implicit memory?
Sort of. The other was all mode. Here, the entire history, every past choice, every outcome seen was explicitly listed in the prompt for each new decision.
So perfect explicit memory in the all case.
Exactly. A way to see if memory access was the limiting factor.
Clever. And how many runs did they do?
Quite a few. 40 LLM agents per model, per context, per task. So hundreds of LLM runs for each task. And for humans, they had at least 25 participants per task.
Solid numbers. And they compared these against some simpler strategies, too.
Yeah, 3 baseline strategies. A recency player just looks at the last outcome. A fictitious player averages all past outcomes. And win, stay, lose shift. Stick if it worked, switch if it didn't. Helps to see if the behavior is simple or complex.
Okay, all right. Let's get to the results. The big question, did the LLMs act like humans?
Well, yes and no. At the aggregate level, looking at overall choice percentages, there were similarities.
By what?
Like the humans, the LLMs did show underweighting of those rare events in tasks 1 and 2. And they also showed the correlation effect learning faster with positive correlation, slower with negative in tasks 3 and 4.
So they showed the same types of biases.
They did. But, and this is a big but, the degree was often different. Sometimes the LLMs showed these biases even more strongly than the humans did.
More extreme biases. Interesting.
Yeah, deviating even further from the technically optimal strategy in some cases.
Okay, but that's the overall picture. What about the trial-by-trial choices, the dynamics?
That's where things really diverged. When they looked closely at the sequence of choices, the underlying patterns looked quite different.
How so? Take the wavy recency effect.
Right. Humans showed it pretty clearly, that delayed, oscillating sensitivity after a rare event. The LL, not at all. No way. No wave. They had a strong reaction immediately after the rare event in the very next trial. Big shift, but then poof, gone. The effect vanished almost instantly in the following trials.
So a sharp spike, then nothing, instead of a wave.
Exactly. Very different temporal pattern.
What about surprise triggers change? Did the LLMs switch more after an unexpected outcome?
Again, not like humans did. Humans showed that tendency a surprise could make them switch, suggesting they're updating beliefs or exploring.
And the LLMs?
The LLM's choices were just much more tightly linked to whatever happened in the immediately preceding trial. They didn't seem to show that distinct surprise reaction that prompts reconsideration in humans.
So much more driven by the very last thing that happened.
Overwhelmingly so, which leads into the comparison with those simple strategies.
Ah, yes, the recency player, fictitious player, win, stay, lose, shift.
The LLM's behavior, it mapped incredibly closely to the recency player strategy, much more so than the human participants.
So they really are just focusing on the most recent outcome.
It seems to be a dominant factor, yes. Now, no single simple strategy explained everything. For either group humans and LLMs are both more complex than that. But this strong recency bias was a defining feature of the LLMs here.
What about learning over the 100 trials? Did they get better at picking the best option?
Mostly, no. For many of the LLM configurations, their rate of choosing the better option didn't really improve much over time.
They didn't learn.
Not consistently. The exceptions were the humans, who did show learning, especially early on in tasks 3 and 4. And also the Gemini model in the all-context condition shows some learning in those tasks too.
The one with perfect memory.
Right. But even then, its learning looked different, more slow and steady compared to the human's quicker initial learning. And providing the full history in the all context only gave slightly better, kind of inconsistent results for the LLMs overall.
Okay, so the picture is surface similarities and aggregate biases, but underneath, very different dynamics, dominated by this recency effect in LLMs.
That's the core finding, yeah.
Let's put this in context. How does this fit with other research comparing LLMs and human cognition? There's been a lot of work lately, hasn't there?
Oh, tons. It's a huge area. People are using cognitive psychology tools to probe LLMs, looking for human-like reasoning, biases, communication patterns.
And finding similarities sometimes.
Definitely. Studies have shown LLMs replicating human errors, exhibiting known cognitive biases, matching results from psych experiments on reasoning or language. It fuels the idea they might be good models for some aspects of our minds.
But not all aspects, presumably.
No, absolutely not. Other work highlights major gaps. LLMs can be irrational in ways humans aren't. They struggle with common sense, social nuance, things that even flawed human thinking handles better. It's a really complex picture.
So where does this paper fit in? What makes it novel?
It's focused on learning over time from repeated experience. Most prior comparisons looked at single-shot decisions, maybe few-shot, like here's a prompt, give an answer. This paper gets into the nitty-gritty of how LLMs adapt based on feedback across many, many trials. That DFE paradigm is crucial for understanding learning, and it hadn't been deeply explored with modern LLMs like this.
Okay, so for people working with machine learning, what are the main takeaways here? What should we remember?
I think the biggest one is be careful with surface similarities. Just because an LLM shows an aggregate bias, like underweighting rare events, doesn't mean it's doing it for the same reasons or through the same process as a human.
The underlying mechanism matters.
Hugely.
Yeah.
And that mechanism, in this case, seems heavily skewed towards recency for LLMs. Humans integrate information over a longer horizon in these tasks. LLMs, it seems to be all about the last outcome.
And that recency bias explains the other differences. The lack of the wavy effect, the lack of surprise-driven switching.
It provides a really neat explanation, actually. If you're only looking at the last trial, you won't get a complex wavy pattern over time. Your reaction will be immediate, then gone. And surprise implies comparing an outcome to a longer-term expectation. If you don't really have that, if you're just reacting to the last event, then the human-like surprise phenomenon wouldn't really show up.
The paper suggested a reason for this recency bias, linked to how LLMs are built, their architecture.
Yeah, the autoregressive nature. They're fundamentally designed to predict the next word or token based on the immediately preceding ones.
That's their core job.
Right, and that pressure to focus on the very recent past for language prediction might just carry over, making them inherently biased towards recent information, even in these quite different decision tasks.
Even when you gave them perfect memory, like in the all condition.
Even then, the recency bias was still strong, which suggests it's maybe less about memory access and more about a fundamental processing bias, perhaps rooted in their architecture or training objectives.
So what does this mean for using LLMs in the real world, especially where they need to learn over time?
Well, it's a caution sign, isn't it? If you're hoping to use an LLM to simulate how users might behave on a website over time, or to predict choices in an economic game, or even as part of an agent learning from interaction.
You need to be aware of this difference.
You really do. Relying on them to capture the nuances of human learning, especially sensitivity to rare events or reactions to surprise, might be risky. Their strong recency could lead to very unhuman-like, maybe suboptimal decisions in dynamic settings.
We shouldn't assume similar aggregate behavior means similar internal processes.
Exactly. It also matters for designing AI that interacts with humans. An AI tutor that only remembers the last mistake might not be very effective, right?
Good point. It wouldn't have the broader context a human tutor would.
Precisely.
Okay, this is fascinating stuff. It naturally leads us into our novel notions segment. Based on this, what kind of future research ideas spring to mind? Maybe ways to bridge these gaps.
All right, novel notions. First thought, building directly on that recency bias. What if we tried to explicitly engineer a more human-like memory decay into LLMs for these tasks?
So make them forget less quickly, or in a more structured way.
Kind of. We could try to modify their architecture, maybe tweak the attention mechanisms or add specific memory components to control how much weight is given to past experiences based on how long ago they occurred.
Tuning the forgetting curve.
Exactly. Could we tune it to match human patterns? Could we get an LLM to show that wavy recency effect by giving it a more sophisticated way of weighting past events beyond just most recent is everything?
That could lead to more realistic simulations of human learning in sequential tasks.
Potentially, yeah. Think better AI agents for A/B testing predictions, or RL agents with more nuanced temporal understanding, building on memory networks, maybe.
Interesting. Okay, what's notion number 2?
This one tackles the surprise element, or lack thereof. The paper hints LLMs don't form expectations like humans do. So what if we made them?
How would you do that?
Train them not just to choose an action, but also to predict the reward they expect to get from each possible action before they choose. Then, after they act and see the real reward, you calculate the prediction error, the difference between expected and actual. That's your surprise signal.
Ah, quantifying surprise.
Right. And the novel step is feeding that surprise signal back into the decision process. Could we train the LLM so that a bigger surprise, a larger prediction error, makes it more likely to explore, to switch its strategy next time?
Trying to explicitly induce the surprise triggers change behavior.
Exactly. Connected perhaps to exploration mechanisms in reinforcement learning. If it works, it could make AI agents much better at adapting when the world doesn't match their internal model. Imagine AI tutors reacting to student surprise, or negotiators changing tactics when predictions fail.
Both really cool ideas, trying to bake in more human-like learning mechanisms.
Yeah, it really highlights the journey ahead, doesn't it? LLMs are amazing, but learning from human cognition might be key to pushing them further, especially in complex interaction scenarios.
Well, this has been a really insightful deep dive. It seems clear that while LLMs can mirror some human biases on the surface,
The way they learn from experience, especially their reliance on recent events, is quite distinct.
yeah. We definitely encourage everyone listening, especially those in the ML field, to check out the paper itself, the link's in the description.
It's worth a read.
And it leaves us pondering, as these models get even more powerful, will they start to learn more like us? Or are these differences, rooted perhaps in architecture, going to persist?
A fascinating question for the future of AI.
Definitely. And just a reminder, our Novel Notions segment was purely for fun and speculative thinking.
Food for thought.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.